We've come so far since people have made these complaints, and while you'll still find some people making complaints, the research we've done in the last 20 years changes the game. We're understanding so much more about these facsimiles than we ever have before. Let me tell you one of the more fascinating things that we've found. We've found that the ancient Egyptians themselves have associated Abraham with this kind of scene. We have a drawing of a person on a lion couch, the kind of altar that Abraham is on in facsimile 1. But they say specifically that the person on this couch is Abraham. So the ancient Egyptians themselves associate Abraham with this kind of scene, which is what Joseph Smith ends up doing. I find it fascinating that so many people will say that Facsimile 1 is a standard drawing associated with the Book of Breathings, which is the text that's around Facsimile 1. And they'll say that's the standard drawing with the Book of Breathings. I'm not quite sure how that's the standard drawing. Instead, what we often find is a cow on an altar. Maybe they're confusing Abraham with a cow. I don't know. Another really interesting point is the idea of human sacrifice. For a very long time, people said, there's no way that this could have happened, the story that we find in the Book of Abraham with Abraham nearly being sacrificed by an Egyptian priest, because the Egyptians didn't engage in human sacrifice. I don't know that it was necessary for that to be an Egyptian practice, because the text says that he's got Canaanite and Mesopotamian religion involved. So we started to study this just because we wanted to understand the Book of Abraham. From an Egyptological point of view, they very much did engage in human sacrifice for certain occasions, and especially for occasions where it seems like someone was disrupting the correct religious order. And in those occasions, one of the ways they would fix that was by sacrificing the person who had created the disruption. And that's the exact story we find in the Book of Abraham, where Abraham is preaching against idolatry. And it's been surprising to me how perfectly the story in the Book of Abraham fits with what I've learned through Egyptological research. And this research has been well accepted all over the world. My colleagues have come to agree that the Egyptians engaged in human sacrifice for just this kind of reason. One other interesting point is that Joseph Smith ties the crocodile that's below the altar in with Pharaoh. And the interesting thing is that just during Abraham's day, a very strong association between the king of Egypt, or Pharaoh, and the crocodile starts to grow. And so Joseph Smith hits that one just head on. Facsimile 2 is the kind of drawing that in Egyptology we call a hypocephalus. It's a very exciting and interesting drawing. And one of the things that we've found with this is that, again, the ancient Egyptians associated that kind of drawing with Abraham. They call it a wedged eye. They say that Abraham is a pupil of the wedged eye, and so they themselves associate this with Abraham. Another fascinating thing about Facsimile 2 is it has 4 figures on it that Joseph Smith says represent the 4 quarters of the earth. Those 4 figures, as Egyptologists, we typically identify them as the 4 sons of Horus. But as we've done research, we've come to realize that the 4 sons of Horus are actually each one assigned a cardinal direction. They're associated with the 4 cardinal points of the earth. So Joseph Smith hit that one, just nailed it. Joseph Smith also says that Facsimile 2 is associated with things about the temple, creation and success in the afterlife and so on. And as we translate the text in Facsimile 2, it ends up being about creation and about success in the afterlife and about getting where you want to be in the afterlife. It's a map of the cosmos and how to get to be where you want to be, which ties in very well with what Joseph Smith is telling us this is about. We find it with little phrases like kolob. That root in many Semitic languages, keleb, is associated with center or being in the middle. And so Joseph Smith gets this one just right again. Facsimile 3 is very similar to a very common Egyptian scene where someone is presented before Osiris on his throne. Joseph Smith tells us that this is Abraham sitting upon the Pharaoh's throne, reasoning upon astronomy. As we've looked at these kinds of scenes in an Egyptian setting, we find the Egyptians substituting Abraham for Osiris and saying that it's Abraham, sometimes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but Abraham that is sitting on the throne. To me, what's really striking and compelling is that for all 3 of the facsimiles that Joseph Smith associates with Abraham, we find that the Egyptians themselves are also associating them with Abraham. The odds of that happening are just so small, it's not reasonable to suppose that this is blind luck. 3 times in a row, dead center, Joseph Smith hits a bullseye.